English teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing story or assessment a student has ever submitted? English teacher here. Had an 8th grade student write to my life at this moment letter to themselves that they write at the beginning of the year, and read to themselves at the end. I always have a rule that they get full credit if I can just see writing on it and see it's coherent English. Though if they definitely don't want me to read it, they should staple it and I'll just look for writing. I had a girl who went over the top to look, act, sound, and be a boy. She wasn't trans, so I was a bit confused on how exactly she wanted to be viewed, so I just pretended she was tomboyish. She was also insanely defiant to her male teachers, and I worked my ass off to build a relationship with her. She wouldn't have it, though I was as kind as I could be. Anyway, the time of year came for me to pass back their letters. By this time, this girl had been moved to a digital learning lab and had been isolated from the Gen Pop. I passed all the letters out and found hers had been left unstapled, though I didn't remember reading it or noticing it wasn't sealed. Curiosity overcame me, so I opened it. My heart broke when I read her rather detailed desire to be away from her stepdad by the end of the year, and her goal for that year was to escape the god-forsaken hellhole. Long story short, that letter ended up being used in court to put her stepdad away for raping her viciously for many years. I felt bad for her, but hopefully she's been able to move on, though I doubt it. The description was pretty rough of what he did to her. I have my HS students write a defining moment memoir about a moment where their lives changed in a significant way. I generally see some stories about childhood abuse and things of that nature where I make sure our social work team is aware of their claims, they're getting support, and that's basically it. However, I did once get a story about the first time a girl in my class had smoked marijuana, except the whole thing was written with the weed anthropomorphized as a beautiful woman named Mary that she met and took on a beautiful all-night date. This thing was about 3 pages long and graphic. We're talking full anatomical descriptions of lesbian sex as an analogy for the experience of getting high for the first time. It just kept going and going, and it was extremely well written to the point that I was really uncomfortable reading it and had to put it away. The worst part is she was so excited for me to read it and came in the next day like, "Did you read it? Did you like it?" I'm super proud. And I had to basically say, "Yeah, it's super well written, but honestly, I just can't be reading something like that written by one of my students." Students were annotating old news articles about a very famous axe murderer from the late 1800s. One student includes an annotation about how the article reminded her of her father. She helpfully included his name for me to Google, and yep, that is how I found out my student's dad is literally an axe murderer. Second place goes to a student who wrote from the path of the Zodiac Killer for a creative writing assignment. It was incredibly well written. If it hadn't been, it honestly might have not been so disturbing. But being in the killer's head as he ties up and stabs young couples to death? No thanks. Oh, and last week someone submitted a horror story in creative writing. I swear to God, she could be a writer for Saw movies. The deaths were graphic and gruesome and ... creative. I had to take breaks while reading it because I'm pretty squeamish. It might get buried, but I need to chime in, mostly in the hopes that this student finds my comment and knows how much his story stuck with me. The first paper assignment of the semester was to write about life at the university through a sociological lens. This guy who was social, well-liked, in a frat turned in this shocking story. He was writing about how hard his life was, how he had to scrounge for meals from the trash while seeing all the other students eat happily in the dining halls. He described how he'd seen his friends struck by cars on the winding mountain roads on campus. I was so taken aback, and I kept reading anxiously to see if his story would take a turn. A squirrel. The student was writing from the perspective of a squirrel. This kid was a genius. I told him later how impressed I was, and he shrugs in a very bro way, stating that's the worst thing I've ever written. If you see this, Matt, that's still my favorite paper by a student. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I'm an ESL teacher. One class, we were talking about different holidays and how we celebrate them. This one student was trying to explain Mother's Day, but didn't know the exact name of it. When I asked him to explain the holiday so I could tell him the name we use, he said, "It's the day where I pleasure my mother." Asked them to write a sentence using the word believe on a vocabulary test. One kid wrote, "I believe the sun will destroy us all one day." He's not wrong. Not an English teacher, but when I was in junior college I was a TAR for a psych instructor and I read and graded essays. There was an assignment for students to create an experiment where they train themselves to create a habit by rewarding themselves after the task. Think Pavlov. One male student wrote about his experiment. He chose to train himself to masturbate more often and his reward was masturbating. And he wrote about it in detail. Very sustainable system, but so weird to submit to your instructor. I was working with a small group of Year 7 students, and we did this exercise where the kids had to create a story using a randomly assigned setting, character and theme. So this one boy ends up with a war zone, a princess and unrequited love. He proceeded to turn these innocuous prompts into a hilariously messed up story set during World War II. It's told from the perspective of the princess of the UK, who wakes up on a battlefield to find Nazis shooting her. Suddenly someone behind her kills her attackers. She turns around to see her rescuer, and it's Hitler. In fear, she runs into a medical tent. Hitler in close pursuit. In the tent, she decides to confront Hitler, but, upon locking eyes with him, realizes he's the most beautiful man she's ever seen, falling in love immediately. Hitler, however, walks right past her and kisses a passing nurse. Furious and jealous, the princess of the UK kills the nurse in a fit of rage, then flees the medical tent, returning to the battlefield before the sad and baffling conclusion to the story, "And then I died." So not disturbing as such, but certainly unexpected. Basically a manifesto about how the student felt ostracized from the school and how he wanted revenge. This was a community college, and he was a freshman. Over the semester, I could tell he struggled, yet he was also insanely talented. Some other students in the class bullied him in my presence, and let's just say I didn't tolerate that at all. I spent extra time talking to him and trying to help him one-on-one. One day, he turns in an assignment talking about his desire to exact revenge for his marginalization. He was triggered when everyone on his floor conspired to trick him to go outside at night in the middle of the winter. Then they locked him out of the dorm. Arseholes. I spoke with him immediately about it, and he assured me it was just hyperbole. Regardless, I did have to notify my supervisor. I also spoke with his RA, but the RA couldn't care less. The student ended up dropping out shortly after this. We stayed in touch for a bit, but after a while, I don't know what happened to him. He was probably the smartest student I had in that class, yet he couldn't make it because of his own personal problems and torment from other students. I teach, but not English. I once had to write up a middle school student. I don't remember for what, but it was serious since I hate writing up, and they turned in their assignment for that day with none of it done. In its place was a half-page description of all the things their dad would do to them if he found out they were written up again. It started pretty mild, say, take the phone away, to more serious things like no food or water. By the time I saw it, they were already out the door, so I hopped over to the counselor and let them have a copy of it. Not sure what happened after that since it was out of my hands, and I'm not sure if it was even true or not. They tended to be overdramatic and stretch the truth in class, but I took it very seriously. I've definitely been more purposeful and welcoming in my interactions with them from here on out. Got to make sure that the classroom is a safe and good place for them. I am a teacher, but nothing submitted to me has ever been considered disturbing. But I did go to high school with a guy who submitted a creative story in which he described coming to school with multiple guns and shooting up the place. It made national news. He's in the military now. Obligatory not a teacher, but in the 4th grade I wrote a story called How I Took Over the World. It involved me assassinating the teacher so I would become the teacher, then assassinate the principal so that I would become the principal, then assassinate the president so that I would become the president. My teacher, who was pregnant at the time, read my story, gave me the go-ahead to finalize it and turn it in for a grade. So I did that. 2 months later I'm sent to the principal's office with my parents and the school psychologist there. I was so scared that I didn't tell them that my teacher approved my story. I still regret not telling them to this day. Secondhand account from colleague submitted during workshop in undergraduate non-fiction writing class. Story was about 18 pages, and was submitted by a 50-ish male. Talks about a 12-year-old girl who is not the man's daughter but belongs to him and his wife, talking about how they like to stroke her and caress her naked body and make her eat things out of their hand. They put collars on her and constantly refer to her perfect hairy pussy and so forth. The rest of the class read the story for workshop and in disgust and horror emailed professor, colleague, who immediately cancelled the workshop and contacted administration about the student. The thing is, everyone was so shocked by the pedophilic nature of the story that no one got to the very last line in which it is revealed that the girl is a cat. Obviously the student was looking for some sort of reaction, which he got. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.